Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your hosts Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. Today is season 5, episode 28, and we are finally back. Kind of. Obviously, it's been a couple of weeks since we've had a podcast up here, and I'm currently recording just after noon on Sunday, November 15th, so it's been about 3 weeks since our last podcast was recorded. We've had a number of different issues, whether it is technology-related or personal-related. This has probably been the hardest time we've had to get together to get an episode done. There's been stuff going on, so right now, Austin is currently got some stuff going on with school, and with the coronavirus going around and numbers spiking. There's some obviously concerns around his job. So right now, Austin is currently focusing on getting some other more important things done. And it's not that we haven't wanted to do this podcast, but as we know, right now, it's been quite a difficult year, and this has probably been the most difficult stretch of this podcast we've ever had mid-season, but we're hoping to get back to our normal routine after this upcoming week. So, since our last podcast, the Steelers have defeated the Tennessee Titans, Baltimore Ravens, and Dallas Cowboys in a row to move their record on the season to 8-0, which is the best start in franchise history. And there's a lot of talk right now about how legitimate the Steelers are and perhaps a chance to get to the Super Bowl. There are those who are concerned because the Steelers wins really since the Browns game, the Steelers have not put together a full game. They dominated the Titans in the first half, then turned the ball over 3 times at the end of the first half to the second half of that game. The Titans nearly came back and tied that game. Really, they got outplayed almost the entire game of the second half, or really the entire game besides parts of the second half against the Ravens. The Steelers were able to win that thanks to 4 Lamar Jackson turnovers. And then a game at Dallas, the typical Mike Tomlin loss. The Steelers were able to prevail despite being heavy favorites in a comeback effort in what was really probably their worst played game of the season. So outside of the Browns game, the Steelers have not really blown out any opponents this year. And even though they're 8-0, there's a lot of people doubting how legitimate they are. So I think the general consensus is this is a good Steelers team, but there are still many skeptics. And frankly, there's still things to be concerned about. The defense is giving up a lot of big plays. The run defense, since Tyson Alualu and Devin Bush got hurt, has been really shaky. They went from being first in the league to now they're 9th in the league after giving up 265 and then 144 rushing yards in back-to-back weeks. And then the offense has struggled a lot on scripted plays. They've been able to move the ball in the second half of their last 2 games with the use of 0-1 personnel. That's no running backs and 1 tight end, basically 4 receivers and 1 tight end. That's been the only personnel grouping that's moved the ball a lot. And they didn't turn the ball over once at Dallas last week, and they still barely won. So that being the case, the Steelers are obviously not playing their best football right now, but they've still emerged at 8-0. And on top of that, we had a COVID-19 issue with Vance McDonald having come down with the virus, and several players, including Ben Roethlisberger, were forced to be placed on the COVID-19 reserve list for being contact trace close contacts with McDonald in that time. Now, everyone has passed with the exception of Kevin Dotson, who has come down with the virus as well. And I believe Anthony McFarland was on there. He's questionable. I'm still not quite sure what's going on there as of this morning. I believe he is still slated to play, possibly. So, just wanted to mention that really quickly. But the Steelers, 8-0, I think they are legit. I understand that they haven't played as well as they could have, and they probably should have lost a couple of games this year with the way they've played at times. But the fact of the matter is, it's that old John Facenda quote from the NFL films, back when I was a little kid, my mom and I would watch these old highlight videos on what was, I think it's still around, ESPN Classic, where they'd play these old highlights from these old Super Bowls, and one of the sayings was, great teams aren't always great, they're just great when they have to be. And that's been the story of the Steelers this season. So I really think that they've followed that. And the thing is, if they do start to get things together, this could be a really dangerous team. And they did escape with a win at Dallas last week. But you look at their remaining schedule, they have a real opportunity to rack up some wins here. Obviously, they play the Bengals later today. Then they're at Jacksonville. And then they're home for a Thanksgiving Day game against Baltimore. They host Washington, on the road for Buffalo and Cincinnati, and then home for the Colts, and then at the Browns. So there's several losable games on here, but outside of maybe the Ravens game, I have a tough time thinking the Steelers won't be favored in any of their remaining games. They should be favored in almost all of them. So, with that in mind, let's turn our attention to the Cincinnati Bengals, the first of two meetings with the Bengals this year. At 2-5-1, they don't look like a very good team. But the fact of the matter is the Bengals have played pretty well for their standards comparatively to last season. I believe they only won 2 games last year, but they've been far more competitive this year, including the fact that they have 2 wins. All of their losses, with the exception of the loss to the Baltimore Ravens, have been within 1 score. I'm looking at their results here now. Just a 27-3 rout at Baltimore, which, is a tough test for a rookie quarterback. The Bengals have hung in there, and they've been competitive. Joe Burrow has been everything the Bengals have hoped for and more as the young first overall pick. And he's been doing it with a pretty awful offensive line. And that's an offensive line that's going to be missing starting right tackle Bobby Hart. And I know, don't laugh. I know he has been really bad in the past, but this year he was actually putting up a pretty solid year by his standards anyways. His PFF grade this year is the highest of his career at 70.4. He's never had a grade higher than 60.3 in his entire career before. So Bobby Hart's putting together a really nice season by his standards, and he will not be playing in this game today, so that's a loss right there. So he's going to be replaced by Hakeem, what's his name? Hakeem Adeniji, I believe is how you say that name. Jonah Williams is also questionable with the stinger. Not sure if he's going to play. Center Trey Hopkins has a concussion. John Ross is also out. Joe Mixon, the starting running back, is out too. So the Bengals offense, which the offensive line is the real weak point of this offense. The Steelers should be able to attack and really dismantle this Bengals front line here. They don't really have any tight end play, despite the fact that C.J. Uzomah and Drew Sample have been really nice blockers. Austin's old prospect that he looked at, Drew Sample, they've been really solid blocking tight ends. They aren't really receiving threats, but there are good receiving threats. And Tyler Boyd, obviously the reliable A.J. Green, T. Higgins, the rookie, is having a nice season, and Auden Tate, when used, has been effective as well. So the big thing for Burrow has been getting the ball out of his hands quickly and not taking hits, and he's been pretty effective too. Definitely a big year for Joe Burrow. This will be probably the stingiest test besides the Baltimore Ravens that Burrow has faced this season. And looking back at all of his game grades, his worst game was definitely the Baltimore game. Trying to get an idea of his chart this year. Here we go. Passing grades, that's what I want to see. Meanwhile, his best game came just a couple weeks ago against Cincinnati. That was an exciting game for those who remember. But if I'm the Steelers, I'm looking at that bad offensive line, and I'm going to want to attack and blitz. Maybe not super heavy like they did at the start of the season, but make sure you're attacking. Giovanni Bernard is the Bengals running back. He's solid, but he's a backup. And with that offensive line, you just want to keep attacking. Try to force this rookie into some mistakes. I think we saw last week that the Steelers sat back too much against a young quarterback, and for whatever reason, well, we know why, without Devin Bush and Tyson Alualu, who should be returning, the Steelers' run defense was not as successful. So because of that, the Cowboys stayed on schedule, and because of that, it didn't matter that the Steelers weren't blitzing. They didn't affect Gilbert's passing game until late in the game when they did bring pressure. So I want to see the Steelers do that and make some splash plays because of it. On the other end of the ball, the Steelers against the Bengals defense. The Bengals defense is pretty bad. It's not a very good unit at all. And looking at their PFF grades, outside of Jesse Bates, who's grading at a 90, which has to be one of, if not the top safety grade or top defensive grade for safeties this year, no one else on this defense is really even good. Everyone else is grading pretty poorly. William Jackson is up there, Carl Lawson is up there, but no one's above a 69.6. So this is a unit that could be had here, and they've been yielding a ton of points so far this season. I mean, let's look at the Bengals real quick. I mean, they gave up 30-plus points to the Browns twice. They gave up 31 to the Colts, 25 to the Jaguars. I mean, their best performance was probably their last game against the Titans, but I think that has more to do with the Titans than anything else. You look at the other side of the ball for the Steelers. You really hope that you can run the ball on this team because they've been an awful run defense this year. You look at their front line. Carl Lawson's a good pass rusher. Geno Atkins will not play. There's a bunch of different guys that really just haven't been producing a whole lot this season. Let's look at their defensive grades here. Their best run defenders, besides DJ Reader, have just not been up to par right now. So this is a unit you can run on. Just not a lot of names here. William Jackson has disappointed. Von Bell's been okay. Again, Jesse Bates is really that guy, the only guy that I'm really concerned about here. He's putting together a nice season. If I'm the Steelers, I want to be able to see if I can have success in other personnels besides 01. There's going to be no Vance McDonald, so I'm interested to see how often Eric Ebron is used and how often the Steelers are using a second tight end, if they use a second tight end. Is it going to be Gerald Hawkins, or are they going to try to trot out Zach Gentry, or do they even call up Kevin Rader? There's a lot of different options here. But as far as the Steelers' offense goes, they should be able to move the ball against this Bengals team. I'm curious to see if Ben Roethlisberger takes deep shots. He should be able to have the opportunity to take some. It's been kind of disappointing this year, but he also hasn't taken as many deep shots either. So this should be a good game for the offense. Just don't turn the football over and don't take too many negative plays here. Top to bottom, this Bengals team is definitely competitive, far more competitive than its counterparts in the past, but the Steelers are still a far better team and should be able to win, not relatively handily, but they should be able to handle their own here, I believe anyways. The Bengals have just not been able to close these games out. I think that they could be a threat next year, but right now they just haven't been up to snuff. So with that being said, I took the Steelers to win this game. It's a 425 game, or 405. I think it's 425. I took the Steelers to win 30-14 and cover a 7.5 point spread. I think that there's just too much offense here for the Steelers, and I think the Steelers defense will be able to snuff out the Bengals. I do think it'll be close for most of the day, but I think Pittsburgh will eventually wear down that Bengals front that is just not up to snuff so far. So Austin has a similar score. He has the Bengals also scoring 14, but he has a 24-14 finish for the Steelers and having them move to 9-0, which improves on their franchise record start. So I'm going to wrap things up early on the podcast here. We have our picks in recorded. I'll tweet those out before game time. Just wanted to get a quick episode in, day of the game. And hopefully we'll be back later this week to recap the game and get a normal episode in these unusual times for the podcast. But I want to thank everyone listening for their patience, and hope everyone enjoys the game today. And stay safe out there. And we'll be back for another episode of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. Have a terrific day, everybody.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.